you're already hardworking. Like you've never been like not top three in your class.
If you say working really hard at learning a language, it's different from if you tell me that the dude was waking up at 4 a.m. to study his fourth
Right.
language.
This is a difficult problem that has a lot of ambiguities and complexities to it. Day in, day out. Like, doesn't work? Take a walk, come back and try again.
I know you, but they don't know you, so I thought maybe we can get, a little bit of intro about you, and then let's get started from there. We'll have a chat.
So I'm a career switcher. I actually graduated from my first undergraduate in 2018. Um, I'm Korean, so I went back to the military for 2 years and I came out and I graduated at 18. Then I went to management consulting. So I worked at a company called Boston Consulting Group. Then while working, I was in the digital transformation team. And I just quickly realized like I didn't really see myself for 20 years in this industry. So then I was talking to a lot of people, and their mentor at the time was like, if I were you at that time, I would go to engineering, any sort of engineering, especially computer engineering if you can. And I think that would be where I want to be if I were at your position and you want to transition out. So I came back from my second undergraduate degree. So I finished my computer science at University of Toronto. Then I did multiple internships, and the last internship that I had was at Clearco with Mike as my engineering manager. He helped me out a lot. So like then at the time, I was like, Mike was like, hey, like I could see you going to a big company, like believe in yourself. So with that encouragement, I applied a bunch of places. Now I work at Amazon as a software engineer. Specifically, I work at the PXT team. So yeah.
You know what? I want to wind back a little bit more even. So, you talked about doing Boston Consulting Group and BCG. For those of us who might not know, is it that's like the classic top three management consulting.
Yeah,
They're obviously trying to hire a certain type of person.
right.
So yeah, you have some diversity in terms of like this person is more like A, that person is more like B. But I imagine that, and I've never been to a management consulting firm, let alone BCG, right? So curious, like as soon as you stepped in and you kind of met several people, what was the thing that kind of stood out to you about BCG?
Honestly, it's like they are type of people who've not really failed at life. I think that's something that they're so that comes with the assumption that you're already hardworking. Like you've never been like not top three in your class. Because the minimum
Mm,
requirement for you to even meet the bar of applications, like if it's a 4.0 GPA, your GPA has to be 3.8 just to make the cutoff.
right,
And the 3.8, it's not your outstanding. It's just you're just meeting the bar. Then from there on, like
yeah,
you got to have all the extracurriculars. So people I've seen that were like there were like I knew year one at university that this is what I wanted to do. So their internships like scream management consulting. Like look at me.
right.
Like I know this is what I want. And they build a storyline that's so compelling that it's like you already have a
I was
fit.
made for
Like
this.
I was
Yeah,
made, I was built, like I was built for this career. Like, but that's not what you often see at university. So like those people really
right,
stand out. So like that just like it just comes natural. Like for you to even scream that story, you have to be consistent year one. You had to be hardworking. And not just hardworking, like you have to be performing well at the same time. Like certain
right.
clubs, consulting conferences, like consulting competitions, like case wins, like all that.
Yeah. Case wins. Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember a lot of that. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if anyone knows, but I started at Schulich Business, right? And I remember when we got like second place for a case, and I was like, well, that's it. Like, 'cause it was like first place or nothing type of situation, right? Um, cool. And so I think there's a BCG in there, but then there's also military service. And
Right.
I want to kind of go a little bit into that because like maybe you can tell me a little bit about, what, because I think folks probably don't know the specific type of military service that you did, the kinds of people that you met there, maybe like how that could have inspired your life, where you find motivation from those kind of events and whatnot.
So I went to military service for in Korea. Then I applied for a peacekeeping operations in Lebanon. So I was there for like half of my military service. So while I was there, I was so there's 300 people that go, and your 300 people are chosen to represent your whole military in Lebanon as a peacekeeping officers. And within the six 300, there's six translators that speak English. So because there's six, and assuming if you just do a quick math, I think it's like the ratio of applicants versus the people accepted are like 200 to 1 for those six positions. So the people that are there with me were like really high caliber. All of them also just like Ivy League graduates or like Seoul National University. Like,
You're like the ugly duckling in every one of these groups, right?
yeah,
It's
like
like
I stand
you
out.
you're so proud of U of T until you go into this group and you're like, wait, like
Yeah, right.
what is
So
going on? This guy's
like
Columbia, that guy's Stanford, right?
I never really thought this is another thing, but like I never really thought about university because I thought wherever I go, like as long as I make it to the top, like I'll just stand out. But you go to Korea and the
Right.
perception is really different in terms of like just the name value and the brand it has. Like for you to just say like you don't have to explain. I think this is something that I talked about with Mike often is like if you go to a place that's like really high performing, you don't have to justify yourself. Like, you don't have to even tell them you're smart. Just tell someone you're from Harvard. Like they'll not question your intelligence, or unless you do something stupid like multiple times. Like they'll just assume you're an
That
intelligent.
happens
Right?
actually.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
they'll just assume you're an intelligent person, and the conversation goes from there. So like that's something that I saw. But while I was there, those were the people that I was hanging out with, and all these people kind of carry like a similar presence, which is like they have a focus, they have a goal. Like these people would wake up. So like we would usually wake up at like 6:30, 7.
Mhm.
And there's some of these folks would just wake up at 4 to study Chinese. And like he's a
Yeah.
Columbia graduate, like already has
Uh,
a Bain
this is not a
offer.
Chinese this is not a
No,
Chinese person.
no, it's a Korean guy
This
studying
is
Chinese because he's like, I think this is going to be useful at one point or another. He already knows where he's
this
going
is
to go
like
into.
his third language or
Yeah,
his
like
fourth
he
language.
already speaks English, Korean,
That's
Spanish, and he's just picking up Chinese. Like another
that's
guy,
crazy.
yeah, like another guy,
Meanwhile, you and I are snoozing, dreaming in English, right?
right?
So,
Like then there are people like waking up at 4 like just to work out. Then like all these like think people talk about like miracle morning at 5 a.m. Like they're just waking up at 4 and they sleep at like
yeah,
12 because they study afterward too. Like they just have a different drive. I think that kind of just um I think perceive like it just I was also surrounded in environments. I was just absorbed to what they were doing. So it just kind of carried me forward in terms of like, oh, these are the habits that really successful people that I think do. And like it might not make a difference like immediately, but like build up one
right,
year. Like all those 2 years are gonna build up to something that's like 365 days, 2 years, like 700 hours, like more on top of someone else, you know?
right, yeah. And you have it in your mind, like when you if you've never heard of it, if you've never seen it, that's one level. But
Right,
if you've heard of it, that's another level. And if you've experienced it, that's like a whole new level, right? It's
right,
you carry with you this idea that if ever I need to tap into intensity, like I've been with these people where their default, not their intensity,
yeah,
right? Their default, their I know Maslow's hierarchy has somewhat been, proven wrong right
right,
already, but just the idea is pretty good. Like how how is it that somebody can work harder in their fourth language compared to my second language, right? And so there's a
right.
humility, this humbleness that it
It
builds
does.
into you, where maybe you don't need to be the guy that studies five languages, but you certainly won't carry the story in your mind that you're the hardest working guy on the block, right? Because you've
Right.
met these people and you're like, no, they deserve that title. I'm in the pursuit of it, right?
Right. You just see yourself, and sometimes you know how if you're working and or you're studying, then you realize, oh, like I tell yourself like I've done enough for the day. Like I'm working harder than most people that I know personally. Then you just come to see people that are like, are you're working hard is their average, then you're behind in the first place. And you're asking yourself like what am I doing? Like is this how I chase after people that are ahead of me? Like I see so like I'm just gonna talk about Yusuf here. Like I thought I was struggling at Clearco. Like I was like grinding work from like and then I was also doing school at the time because it was COVID. So I was doing two things at once. Then Mike tells me Yusuf did full course, did a Clearco internship, made more points than like most of the software engineer ones or twos in that team. Then he also was doing lead code at the sides. He was going to try to go to Google, and I was like, okay, like I'm
Yeah,
nowhere near. Like this is not even a
that's crazy.
competition,
Not neither am I, right? Like
right?
he's kind of yeah, and then the funny thing is like the general aura that he has is so positive and like, hi, how are you? And you would never think that somebody's doing six courses and doubling, tripling a full-time engineer's output as an intern studying to go to Google, and you know what's the best is like, and then goes to Google, right?
Right.
So
So
that how do you
that's
succeed on every front, right?
like that's something that I saw a lot with these people too, was because they take it as like a norm. They don't complain about it. Like they don't whine, or you don't have to tell them like, "Oh, are you working hard enough?" Like they don't really act out. Like their attitude's not carried forward from how tired they are. Because this is
Yeah,
something they just take it for granted. It's like, oh, like I'm just living life, you know? Like this is not
right.
hard.
And
Like I'm
they're
just
almost interested, right? Like they're, I feel like people who are pretty good at it, pretty good at pushing themselves, right? Like I was having a conversation with Yusuf the other week where if I just start working out and I can't run and I'm panting in a minute, it's kind of hard for me to take myself seriously. Like I can't treat myself like I'm in the Olympic regime, right? And so I felt like a piece of this is also like you just have to make enough progress where you get to the point where like truly I feel like I'm better than the average person now. And I kind of want to start taking this seriously. And now I'm enjoying the idea of, oh, can I push the limit? Can I do 20 minutes instead of 15 minutes? Can I do 30 minutes instead of 20 minutes? And at some point, you're actually in a very high percentile and you're in this mode of, well, obviously I'm supposed to feel some amount of pain and exhaustion, tiredness, and all that. The whole idea, though, is like, could I push myself more? And so, like, when you get to that moment, you're not looking at yourself and seeing complaints. You know,
right.
you're that's like way behind you because this phase of I will negotiate every time I have to work out, every time I have to study, every time I have to learn you don't negotiate anymore. You're not the person who needs to negotiate. It has become an obvious kind of, so to speak, a part of you, right?
This is one thing that my partner told me at Boston Consulting Group that really stuck out, and I think that's a good way to like sum up how I saw the three people at the consulting firm and at the peacekeeping operations and like people I've seen it make it, was that they're kind of addicted to the amount of work they put in and the success that they achieve afterwards. Like, once that gets rolling, I think it just builds up and accelerates the speed that you go into because you know the amount of work you put in will translate to results at one point or another. And because of that, and because they know already, they don't have to negotiate. Like, I think a big thing for me that I always tell myself is like, it's easier to be persistent when you have a goal. It's also easier to be persistent if you know you're going to get to the goal. Like, it's hard to work for something that you know it might not pay out. But because they've seen like, they have a history that builds up to build that character. And once that's there, like, they just know for granted because they've been successful so consecutively. You know, like the winning mentality, it's there. Like they
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. I feel like pieces of what you say are things that we constantly think about and we're trying to like bake into our program right now, which is like this idea of what's the origination of what you just, that's the final state. But what's the origination of that state, right? How does it start? And one might argue that it starts smaller, right?
Way
One might
smaller.
argue that it's a small win.
Yeah.
And then you increase scope, so to speak. And
Right.
then you win again, you increase scope, you win again. If you think about a software engineer, it's exactly that, right? What do you give to an intern? A very defined scope,
Right.
right? Unless you're me. What do I give to Kyle, right? It's super not defined, right? But usually, what do you give to an intern? Like, it's super defined, but then what does it mean to be full time? Like you can handle a little bit more complexity,
Right.
but then what does it mean to be senior? Like you can handle the vague, penetrate through it, and carry it into a result that matters. But then what does it mean to be like a staff engineer? Now you can get a huge vague thing with a big, very, very top level goal and manage to organize a fleet of people to wrap themselves around like a vision, a way to do something, and then go ahead and do it. You know, like that's there's so much baked in there, right? Like
Right.
you'd have to be more believable. You'd have to know how this can work out. You'd have to be interpersonal, all these things. So you like almost building these little wins up
Yeah.
and getting better. And by the way, it's not even just a win in terms of how much you work, right? Like I just said, it's wins in terms of interpersonal.
Yeah.
Like it's wins in terms of, being able to look at business impact and whatnot. So
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. Like, what kind of life did they live in those supposed earlier years where they got these wins? And the feedback loop was always positive, but it just got a little bigger. a little bigger. And now they're at a point where they can execute like a 2 year idea in their mind. And they have the same level of conviction as when they were a child. And they were saying, hey, I'm going to not eat this marshmallow and wait to eat two marshmallows, right? That's like super small scope compared to what they do now. But it's the same level of almost the same level of conviction, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's super interesting. Cool. So like you do BCG, um you did military service, you why like why from there does a person not go into business and then decide to go into computer science, decide to go into software engineering?
I think that's a pretty like multifaceted question. So there's a lot of things that I considered. Like there's realistic ones like earning potential and the work-life balance. All the goody two-shoes stuff that you just hear about software engineering, that was also part of the
Yeah.
consideration. But most importantly, I because you see from the management consultant's point of view, like what are we recommending to these people that we're talking to? And a lot of it just came down to automation and like elimination. Like what that also means is it's going to translate to elimination of a lot of roles that people are previously involved in. Like I'm sure like if you guys are involved, like you hear about ChatGPT 3 and you're like it can do a lot of stuff like DALL-E, like drawing, all these stuff that we thought like were the creative process that humans were involved in. Like a lot of the things computers can now do too. And you see this trend build up and you come to a conclusion that I think that's not so like hard to get to. It's just that unless you're in tech, I think a lot of the industries will see reduction in roles, like heavy reduction in roles where there's minimal human input. So either you're going to be the one managing the software, or you're just going to be outside the picture, probably getting universal pension of some sort. And I just didn't see myself wanting to be in that other group. So that's a one big
Yeah.
reason what motivated me. And two was like, eventually I want to start my own stuff, with friends. And I did start a startup while I was at consulting too. And like I didn't talk about I think I talked about Mike briefly. It was like we raised funds with big names, and we had to hire a lot of software engineers, and I realized like I can't communicate with these people. I can't even
Yeah.
set up expectations for like how they're gonna deliver stuff because I just don't know. Then like
Yeah.
combining these
Yeah.
two things, saying like I'm gonna be limited if I don't know how to do this, and I need to eventually work with these people somehow, and I can't communicate like how effective they were. Like I don't see myself if I unless I know how to do this, I just don't see myself. So I
Right.
think then the
Yeah.
logical conclusions was like you have options of where you could choose to go into for that problem, but like one chapter I
Yeah.
think is
So, I mean, you covered, like, I don't know that a person needs any more reasons than that one, right? Like, there's the obvious ones, like you said, there's the money and the work-life balance. Then you talked about like the potential, like you
right,
can make it, right? But then also like the potential of even if you weren't the one to make it, you can communicate, you can manage it, you can be a better leader, you can be empathetic. I always say, how can you be empathetic while you're ignorant, right? If you don't know, it's not empathy. When you're saying half thank yous because you're not sure if you should have said why can't we get this faster versus wow, we did a great job. When you're in that point of ignorance, how can you be an empathetic, compassionate, good leader? Every thank you is a half thank you.
like how do you
Every could we
appreciate?
be faster? You
Right,
can't appreciate.
like you can't
Ignorance
appreciate the
cannot
work,
build it.
right?
Yeah.
Like I think a
So,
big trend that I saw here now too was like a lot of the MBAs and like consultants and investment bankers came into tech companies as PM. I think that
yeah,
trend has been slowly dying down. Even in Amazon, there's a specific
yeah,
role designed for PM or manager or like program managers. You have to have at least an SD2 level to translate laterally internally. And they understand. And like they're not dumb for why they did this. It's like they
yeah,
tried before and they quickly realized unless you know how to code and you can appreciate the amount of effort and the
yeah,
time it takes to actually set expectations correctly, like you can't even go into management roles or like business roles.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's appreciation, the not just from the point of view of that person managing downward, but it's a two-way street as well.
Right.
Because that person has to be able to imagine that you know.
Right.
And therefore, that person has to be able to imagine that when you say thank you, you know, and you're saying thank you. And that's the reason why that person feels thanked,
Right.
because they need to be able to believe that you're not ignorant, right? And so there's a good reason for, I wouldn't say all people have to be technical per se, but there's a really good strength when it comes to, you know, if so much of our world is software, if so much of our world, like if so much of the best, most impactful things come from software, then you could be the builder of it. But even if you don't want to be the builder of it, how are you going to be the one to appreciate? And how is anyone going to be able to appreciate you when you don't speak the language, right?
I just wanted to share that with like students too, because I just wanted to set the expectations, like whatever goal that you have for yourself, this might not be the end all be all, like alpha omega, like software engineering. But if you want to work in tech, this is going to be that stamp of approval for a lot of engineers that are working with you that says, oh, he understands what he's talking about. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a communication bridge of I don't know, like how much would you have to coach me? Because I didn't do any military service. So if you wanted to explain some very commonly accepted rules, right? You wouldn't ever need to explain that to another person who went to the same military service as you. You would have to explain all of it to me. And in fact, what usually happens is you just give up and you just decide not to talk to me about it,
right.
right? Because it's just a headache to try to go and explain all that to me,
Yeah.
right? And so it's just easier to build it's easier to build teamwork and friendship when the other person can imagine that you understand, right? So I think that's a big one. So you do computer science, you make the huge dive. How hard was that? Like, did you expect the students to be extremely hardworking, or like did you expect it, but you were more impressed by how hardworking they were, or
So the cutoff for computer science is like, I think right now it's like really high at U of T. I think it's like
yeah.
the highest or like right there with engineering science right now. It's like,
It's a 4.0. Like
yeah.
you need a 4.0 of university grades, and these are not like American university grades.
So
These are like very hard
So
university
there's
grades.
500 spots, I think, per cohort at U of T, and there's like 4,000 students that come in, and like that's just this year. So the previous year is also applied this year, just in case their grades were, you think they were too low last year. So like the competition is very. So the cutoff for the post, which is like the post admission like grade requirement that you need to get in, for me was 95 on two subject requirements. Like, and I thought I wasn't even safe, like
Yeah.
so like people are just like busting their
Behind.
behind to like really working, like every exam matters, every assignment matters, like
But well, what does it mean though when you say, really busting butt to like really, really work hard, right?
I
It's
slept
like as
4
you
hours.
say that, that's like if you like I'll give you an example. If you say working really hard at learning a language, it's different from if you tell me that the dude was waking up at 4 a.m. to study his fourth
Right.
language, because that
Yeah.
that really puts it into perspective
Right.
for me. And so, like, what do you mean by hard working?
Because most of the, if you ever solved computer science like assignments or like math assignments or physics assignments, those problem sets don't solve themselves. Like they're not meant to be solved in one sitting usually. Like
Yeah,
you have to spend weeks sometimes just like staring at it without like, I've tried this
blank
method.
page.
In a blank page, like I've tried this goes to dead end. I've tried that to go to dead end. But then like
Yeah,
dead end doesn't give you the good grades that you want to get into the program, right? So I
yeah,
think that first throughout, I think to even go in, but afterwards, like most of the time I just like 3 to 4 hours of sleep on a daily basis. You sleep at like two. Sometimes you just try really
yeah.
hard, didn't work out. You just wake up the next day, go for a walk and try again. Like hourly,
And
like
this is by the way, this is like when I say this, a lot of people are like, "That's inefficient" and whatnot. It's like I don't think I don't think people understand sometimes the amount of because when you've tried all week and every week something is due and you're still at a blank page,
yeah,
blank is a guarantee zero,
right,
right? And then miraculously, you try looking at the pattern, you find a pattern within the pattern. So you're like, you find a third degree pattern, the pattern of the pattern, which ignites an idea. And finally, you're like, oh my goodness, I have a proof. So
right.
you write down the proof, and then you get an amazing mark because the proof was good, which it doesn't happen for most people. But if you get that amazing mark, you don't feel like, yes, this is who I am. So next week I'm good. Because the truth is, when next week comes,
There's another
it
assignment.
just got harder, right?
Yeah,
It's so
it
it's
usually
not like
builds up.
you have an ideal. You
No,
don't want to sleep 3 hours.
yeah,
You just literally have a blank page and you just can't
no.
you can't get a zero. So how do you deal with this? And this is week after week. So it's relentlessly asking more of you.
Like problem sets after problems. I think Yusuf can also attest. I'm sure Yusuf also saw a ton of this at
I don't
school.
know if we can ask Yusuf to,
Yeah, like
because
as
he's like, who knows? Maybe he had an easy time.
yeah,
Like, let's talk
honestly,
about the mere mortals, you and
yeah,
I, right?
okay,
So,
like yeah, that was just misery after misery, like
yeah,
it's like it doesn't end.
yeah,
And you know the
yeah.
next year's subject's gonna be harder.
But I think it does build. So I think it builds two things. I think 100% most of the material you learn is tangential. I
Yeah, it
think
is.
everyone can agree to that. I think I actually think you're being very kind to say computer science is tangential. To computer science, you're being very kind. Um, it sometimes it doesn't even touch. So it's like
Uh,
I would say what you build is not the specific knowledge, but it's that idea of problem solving, the idea of like when you realize you can crack a difficult pure math course and you did the impossible 20 times in a row to finish it, and you have a coding problem, it builds a certain amount of resilience in you where you're like, I think I could probably crack this, right?
I,
There's more clues to cracking this.
honestly, 100%. I think the biggest takeaway that you get from this program that's not coding, because a lot of them aren't coding related, is that mindset, like the engineering mindset of like, this is a difficult problem that has a lot of ambiguities and complexities to it. And you just learn to stick with it day in, day out. Like, doesn't work? Take a walk, come back and try again. Because you'll see problems in real life once you start working at companies that just screams at you like, what the, like, I don't understand any word this problem, like what it means. Like, Mike, Mike gave me as an intern, like, okay, this is a GDPR thing, like, learn it. Like, we need to somehow deal with it in our company. Like, as an engineer, then you're like, what does this mean? Like, what, like, what's the acceptance criteria here? Like, what do I have to do? But you're
Yeah,
like, okay, then you just like learn to break it down to different steps.
right.
Then break that steps down and try again until each problem can be solved. Like, and I think that's like the biggest takeaway. It's like persistence and engineering mindset. I think engineering mindset comes with
Engineering
persistence.
mindset. Beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love it. To build an engineer. So that's what like our program is so focused on, right? Like I know I'm being greedy when I'm making a program like this, but you know, I think it's what you and I would have wanted, right? It's
Honestly, yeah.
like how could you abstract away all the difficulty? Like if you can learn the engineering mindset and the difficulty, but instead of doing proofs, you actually worked with software systems for 4 years while keeping it extremely difficult. That would be amazing.
I
And
would
so
think that's like that's
I mean, I'm being greedy when I do it, but could you imagine if we could just do that? And so, I mean, that's the quest that we're on, right?
right.
That's the difficulty.
You'll see things break down. You'll write codes that don't work the first time. Then you'll just have to go through the error messages. And like I think initially I also had this fear too, was like initially when you first see that error message screen, you're like, oh man, what did I do wrong? But then engineering
Yeah, it's like it's
mindset,
red.
it's like, oh, the build failed. Like, what for?
Yeah.
Then then the engineering mindset is this is where it comes in. It's like you'll see like thousands of lines sometimes of error messages that are just logs of things that could have gone wrong. And you just need to
Right.
dig through each one every time. Does this work? No. Like, why didn't it work? Then you try to fix it. Then go to the next one. And you just have to like do this on and on until the whole system runs successfully. I think this is
Yeah.
where that persistence will carry over in your real day-to-day life.
Yeah. And it's a necessity. It's not like a nice to have. It's a
No.
necessity, right? Yeah. Cool. So you did a couple of DevOps stuff, and then when you came to Clearco, I'm curious what do you carry away from your experience at Clearco? I feel like that's, like that being the step right before Amazon. I feel like you had a moment to be able to reflect. It was a start of a super tumultuous, like one of the first times when tech had big layoffs and whatnot.
Right,
So
right.
leading into that, I feel like you had the perfect storm. Like this is a great example of a person who could really just lose himself
Right.
because
Yeah.
it's like I had something great going with Boston Consulting Group. You could just be raging. You
Right.
could be like, why didn't I just do this? I would already be an engagement manager. I would already be a consultant, you know, like
Right,
senior
right.
consultant or whatever. Like you could be going back and regretting, you could be, you know, cursing the times that you're born in. Why am I graduating into this year? But I don't know. I get super impressed by the ability to take everything and then somehow turn it into Amazon, right? That's like a company for many people.
Honestly, I gotta say, like Mike gave me a lot of encouragement along the ways. Like I can't say enough thank yous to Mike. The reason I chose Clearco was also Mike too. Like at the time, I was interviewing with a lot of different faces, so I had a storyline that I designed for myself, which is initially you don't have any
Nice.
experience. You get to have a startup, then you go to a Series A, then you go to Series B, maybe a Series D. Then at the last stage, I think I was like, what kind of story do you want to tell about yourself when you're applying to resumes? Because the HR people will take a first look and they'll see what kind of person you are based on that resume. So you have to
Yeah.
have your options of like, am I a startup person or am I, because I was interviewing for Meta at the time and then I was talking to Mike and I think the biggest, this one of the biggest reasons I chose Clearco was like Mike was there. And I think you should really understand like having someone like Mike as a mentor or like a manager will make a difference in your life because managers build and destroy your careers as a junior. There's
Oh my
nothing
goodness, say that again, right?
like there's
Managers
nothing
build and destroy. Like
like
look at
there's
me. My
like there's
manager built me.
right. And then Mike carried that favor forwards for me and I think Yusuf. Like you'll see people that are just getting their careers destroyed by managers because they can't vouch for the person or they just don't distill them the things they should have learned as a junior. So like I went in there, and the biggest takeaway, I think, that question was just meeting someone like Mike that really pushes you. Then, because Mike will ask you as a person, like first thing I remember was like, "What do you want from this?" And I said, "I want a full-time offer," because I came here for
Nice.
Mike, and at the time we thought Mike and I were just gonna be working there for a while. I was like,
Yeah.
"I want a full-time Mike offers," and Mike just laid out a plan like, "Hey, this is the number of points that you need to commit per week. Like this is the number of people that I need you to impress. Like." Just laying out a plan of what I need to do. So then that just because it's easier to do stuff when you have specific goals. So Mike really set
Hmm.
that agenda out for me. So I was just working towards it. Then the news of like layoffs just kicked in, and Mike
Yeah.
was like, "Kyle, like, I'm sorry, but I don't know."
That was a
I,
bad moment for us.
like Mike just invited me for coffee, and was like, Mike was like, "Kyle, I don't know if you can make it. Like, it's not even a question of like whether you're good or bad. It's just like."
Yeah.
There's something that's bigger than all of us happening here, and there's nothing you can
Yeah.
do and I can do about it. Like, then I was like, I was
The
obviously,
macro, right?
yeah, the macro
How
just
much did we
unfolded right in
and that
front
was
of our face.
before any layoffs, right? Like that
Yeah,
was we were basically saying, I think the macro is really getting bad. I think you actually might not have an opportunity here.
no, Mike
I
just
remember
called it.
saying
Yeah,
like, yeah, like it was a funny moment because I was like, the macro matters. The macro is like the tide, and you're like the swimmer, and you can swim faster than Michael Phelps if the tide just pushes you out, right? Like
right,
that's how powerful the tide is. And so, what I felt was that tide was like a tsunami was coming the other way,
right.
and I was like, Kyle, you're a great swimmer, but even if you're an amazing swimmer, like the tide is really coming the other way. I feel it, right? And so, and I remember I used Amazon as the example, and I said,
He said, "Go somewhere
what that
safe."
means is, yeah, like, but that you're gonna have an issue because everyone,
Yeah, yeah,
like, there's gonna be a huge supply of labor, and there's gonna be a lot of demand for jobs.
right,
And so economically, this is just making it harder. It's not going to be easier. It's going to be harder. It's like going into Amazon. It's going to be harder. And I remember we used the word Amazon. Like we
yeah.
said, we said Amazon, and just it just so happens to be that you went into Amazon, right? So
Because Mike told me, I think if the rising tides lift all boats, like a pretty common saying, but in our case, the water was like going out, like it was a drought, and it was going to
yeah,
happen soon, or people were seeing it. So whoever was going to go to startups did not choose to go to startups, and now started applying for big companies, and that wave means like before, if you were a 6 or 7, you might have just gone in because they were on like a massive hiring spree. Now, like eight's not good enough, and nine's questionable, and
yeah.
you need to be a 10 to get in. And that's what Mike told me. And I was asking myself, I was like,
A 10?
a 10, like a 10, like I don't know if I can pull a 10, Mike. Like I'm not gonna lie, I was like pretty like dejected, but just because I was dejected doesn't mean I stopped working because
I think that's where you're you. because I think a lot of people will be dejected. I don't think the story is about me. I think the story is about you because I can say the truth, but not everybody is going to be like feeling terrible on their way walk back. And maybe you've had this practiced walk from all the hard problems that you solved, where you're walking and you know you have to go back home to the blank page again, so to speak, right? So maybe this is like the metaphorical equivalent where you're like, okay, like I mean, I was pretty confident I'll get to an eight or maybe a nine, but like how do I go to a 10? And then you decide to rise to the challenge, you know? I think that's like the necessary ingredient for successful folks.
Honestly, I think that's the biggest one. It's like you you can cry about it. That's not gonna solve anything. Like I can act out, but like what does that change? If you don't like
Yeah.
where you are, but you're doing the same thing, like that's insanity. I think that's Einstein. But like you can not like the place that you're at and call yourself like I'm working hard, but like if things don't change, you're not working hard enough, I think,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So before I was like still doing lead code because it's it's just like what do you call it, unemployment saver for software engineers, but like
Yeah.
um you like as soon as Mike told me 10, I think that's the expectation that I had for myself to even make it through the interviews. I was like, I need to see a problem. I need to be able to solve it in every possible way that I saw on the solution book at a speed that's faster than most people. And
Yeah.
also
Your
have a,
diagnosis needs to be like that. It
yeah,
needs to
like
be like,
I
oh,
need to, I need
I
to
don't want
see it.
to.
Then I need to be like, oh, I've solved this problem before and this is how I've solved it. And also in the meantime, um, display myself as a character, someone that they would want to hire. I mean, that's a goal that
Right.
I set for myself when Mike told me I needed to be a 10. Because in my mind, that's what a 10 was. Like
Yeah.
I solve all the problems because the interviews, typical interviews take about 45 minutes to an hour for an engineering problem. I need to be able to solve this problem like 5 to 10 minutes. And I need to guide them through how I solved it. I can't be like, I remember the solution. That's how I solved it. I think there's,
Right.
I don't want to go into the nitty gritty of how I did it, but like, so I just, that's the goal. So then I just laid out a plan for like how I was going to achieve it, which was just like every day I would solve 3 to 4 legal problems. You may not think that's a lot, but if it's a medium or hard,
No, but it's how you do it.
it's like
I don't
how
believe
you,
in quantity. Like quantity will get you to the seven.
right,
Like it won't. You have to go deeper if you want to go higher, right? So
right. Then 4 to 3 new problems every day. But in the meantime, I would go to the previous day's problems and just regurgitate them and just type them out as
right,
much as I can, just going through the problem solutions again and again until they're like pitch perfect. I think in this case, like I would be able to do it like this. And I knew exactly what
right.
the time complexity, space complexity was. Like, um, I don't want to, yeah, this sounds like all leak code stuff, but I don't want to go, but that's the process that I just put myself through. Then afterwards, I knew exactly when my interviews were going to happen. So I set myself for like, there's an online sites that prepare you for like mock system design or coding interview questions.
Mhm.
And I set like 2 interviews every day, same time. Because at the same time,
Right.
like you might not think much about it, but coding interviews,
Circadian rhythm, right?
yeah, like just set myself up the entire rhythm of what this process is going to look like for 3 months. And I just set myself through that process like every day,
Yeah.
consistent, day in, day out.
Your brain is used to your tiredness level is used to the, let's say 2 p.m. 2 p.m. constantly. I my best performance becomes 2 p.m. right? So
Yeah, like,
like just the knowing that you had to do that because of the market is not so friendly.
yeah,
Knowing that you had like, you know, the idea of having one bullet and you've got to hit the bullseye, so
yeah.
to speak, right? So that's crazy. So I mean, okay, so you're all the way here. I feel like, you know, I think we can do some Q&A soon, but maybe before we do the Q&A, when you kind of wrap up, I know this is just the beginning, but when you wrap up the journey, that was a long and more, I would say, more difficult journey than the average person, right? Like it was, you had to intentionally come here. And if you had to think about the qualities that really got you here, what do you think those qualities would be? Like, what would you like when you know, as like a mentor, what do you want our students to focus on most? What made the biggest impact?
I think intentionality is a big one. I think that's something that I do share about with you guys is that it's a purposely chosen career that you guys are making here. Some of you may be from like a student point of view. Some of you might have other jobs that you're doing besides like launch up, but like you intentionally chose this career. So that purposefulness, I think, is not something that a lot of people have. So having that goal would, I think, will probably set you apart if you're able to or willing to put the work in. Because it's different if you have a goal in mind, and that's why you chose it. You know what's out there, so you chose this versus I don't know what's out there, so I chose it, are very two different mindsets,
Right.
right? Everything else I could just regurgitate, like persistence, like hard work, diligence. That's again,
A
that's
given.
that's a given. Like, but what's I think
Love it.
separate about you guys, I think, will be the intentionality of why I chose this. And if you
Mm,
can make that or be able to display that character to other people, that your level of maturity for why you chose this career is different. I think that's something that
mm.
people will appreciate about you guys more because you know that this is the best option that whatever you were able to choose from, and that's why you chose it.
All right. Okay, I have a call in. Oh, look, Jade is the first call in. So let's do Jade.
Hey Jade.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Hello. All right. Hello, Kyle.
Hi Jade.
Well, thanks for sharing your stories. I actually had fun like listening to your journey, and then I actually enjoyed listening to the conversation you and just Mike had. I have a couple of questions I wanted to ask. The first one is, like Amazon or any other like FANG or like MANG companies. They are like notoriously known as hard to get in, especially for engineers, right? So,
Right.
what was the process like in terms of your preparation, like interviews and any other stuff that you had to prepare to get in? And then what was the most like challenging part for you during the preparation?
Um, I think let me answer that in a reverse order because I'll
Sure,
just talk
yeah.
about the anxiety first, and I'll talk about the preparation process and
Okay.
things to look out for. So the most difficult part is just anxiety. I think as a career switcher, like you're making a gamble for a lot of you here. So
Right.
you're like wary of like the cost that you're putting in, and you're
Mm,
wary of like what if there's no output that justifies my input. So I think
right.
that could be really taxing physically and mentally because I
Mm,
think that's something that I also went through because I think that's the scariest part when you're applying, right? Because
of course, yeah.
you don't hear back and you don't know when they're gonna hear back or when they're gonna reach out to you,
Right.
right? So I think that was the most difficult part. And the process of how to get in is some of them used to be ongoing. Like you just used to, before when the market was good, it used to be just an
Mm,
ongoing of like when to apply. You see a position open and you would apply. But
right.
now I think they're gonna go in a very like systematic, like this is when all the openings are gonna happen, or like I
Mm,
think not systematic, but you'll see like a certain time frame of when a lot of positions open up.
right.
Like in our case, it'll probably be like Q1 or Q2 or Q3, like around these times when like companies either do
Mm,
layoffs or people just
yeah.
switch out, and you'll see the
Right.
vacancies they're trying to replace. I think that's when the time frame that you could go for.
Hmm.
There's a GitHub list. I don't know if you search up like company like applications that are open, and there's usually like a
Yeah.
time frame of when positions open up for certain companies. So be
Right.
wary of when the cycle hits. And I think
Okay.
usually interview process is about 2 months, 2 to 3 months, depending on like how fast they get back to you. Like when I was
Mm,
applying, like typically before I've been to Amazon's interview process before, it used to be 1 month. Now it's like 3 months because all the applicants were all there and they're like trying to schedule
wow.
interviews and like I got delayed twice. Like I had an original date set there like sorry, there's too many applicants, so they pushed me back twice and I was like, oh man,
Oh my God.
this is so this is so scary. So in terms of the process, I would just say if you're going for a big tech, they will look at
Uh-huh.
data structures and algorithm. Like it's just unfortunate. I don't think it's really relevant to what you do, but they'll still test you on
Mm,
it. So like I said, just a lot of lead code, not just a lot, but like you got to be good. Being good's already like a given. Then afterwards, it's like a fit
yeah.
thing that they look at. So
Yeah.
um, for some of the smaller companies that I interviewed for, I feel like they'll give you a coding assignment and you have to do it for like over a weekend or 1 week. So like that's
Mm,
just gonna
okay.
really test your knowledge of like whatever um, language or framework that you use. So I think
Hmm.
um, apply for a company that you know you can build those assignments in. Like I feel like,
Mm,
and
okay.
also choose a language that I think it's easy to do those assignments in. Like JavaScript, I think might be more difficult for most people to do leak code, just because there's a lot of
Oh, okay.
syntextual things that you just don't know unless you've done or dealt with it a lot more. So
Okay.
like Python might be easy, Java might be easy. Like choose a
I
language
see.
purposefully because it will make a big difference.
I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All
Hope
right.
that helps.
Related to the new language, I have one more question actually, because like many developers, I guess like most of the developers, they will face the time where you have to quickly learn the language and then use them right away, especially when you actually join in a new
Right,
company.
right.
Have you ever had situations like this, or
Oh yeah, plenty. Mike gave me JavaScript to learn at Quaco like right away.
how was your like studying towards a new language, and what did you
Uh,
do?
what I do is like I usually ask once because by that time you're going in knowing that you're gonna have to talk to your manager. So I ask like about
Yeah.
month away, like what stack we're gonna use. I ask Mike, I ask my current manager what the stack is, and I just buy a Udemy course and I just like go through all the stacks once. I think if you have time afterwards, like try to build a personal project because that's really gonna test your ability to like not just use the things you learned, but like go look at the documentations. Like right now I'm
Mm,
learning
okay.
Scala because it's a new language that they use, and like
I see.
most cases, because they're big tech, they'll adopt like new technology like 1 month in, another quarter in.
Right.
And it really just becomes important for you to like, once you understand one language really well, a lot of the things that they
Uh-huh.
do in a framework are pretty similar. Sometimes there could be vastly
Mm,
difference, like C sharp, like something could be very like different from Python. But if you understand one framework really well, you'll just be able to look for certain things that makes your search easier or faster. Like in my case, if you know
okay.
Django, then you could just look at a JavaScript node and be like, oh, is there something that does similar things? Like, how did they do this here?
Right.
So then it just becomes like a syntax thing rather than you understanding the whole concept from day in, day out.
I see. Because the core concepts are like pretty much similar, like over like different languages.
Like,
I see.
yeah, like everything you think of like a load proxy, like how do they deal with those? Like or
Mm,
API
yeah.
gateways, like how do they deal with those? Like what do you do? Like what's the directory setup? Like how do they organize certain things? Like some
Mm,
things will just easily translate onwards. So I think
I see.
right now, if you're just starting, I don't know what stages they're at, but if you're starting, just really know your language and really know your framework.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So my last question is, when you were sharing your stories, I remember that you worked with like many extremely hardworking people, or whether in school, like military service, or like at work. And I remember you mentioning that they have different drives and goals. And like for me, you're also part of that extremely hardworking people.
Well,
And
thank
I
you.
wanted to ask you, what's your like motivation and drive to work hard, and how do you motivate yourself like all the time?
Um, that's a good question. I'm that's something that I'm really searching for as well right now. But before it was just to go in and like make my input worth it by going into Fang. And now that I'm here, I'm really asking myself that question. But before it was like going into a big name tech company. I think
Mm-hmm.
internally there are other stuff, which is like being as an immigrant, I saw my parents sacrifice. So like just being able to justify their sacrifice means a lot to me. So like I want to be a bigger person than my parents were, like in terms of like bigger in terms of a lot of different things, but like just being able to afford the opportunities that I was given to my child, I think is something that I think about a lot, or just giving back to my parents.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that I really pushes me, you know. Yeah,
That's amazing. Okay, all right.
yeah,
Oh, well, I think that's all the questions that I wanted to ask you today. And then like key takeaway like from for me, like from your stories, I can actually boil down to like three things, like
yeah,
persistence, hard work, and engineering mindset. And then that's all I need to like keep myself going towards what I want. So I just wanted to thank you so much, Kyle. And I will wrap up my questions here. So thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. No problem, Jade.
All right.
We got another call in from Matthew. So Matt, I'm gonna ask you to just ask the question that you wrote in when you call in.
Right, awesome.
What's up,
Hello.
Matt?
Can you guys hear me well?
Yep. Hi,
I
Matt.
can.
Yeah, I just have a question about like your workplace or like at Amazon. I was just wondering like how long did it take you to like get used to the environment? More specifically, like understanding like the code base, the technologies that were used, and like the languages. I was wondering how you were able to like um, or like any tips or strategies how you got used to it or understood everything, because yeah, I was just really curious how you were able to like look into those things, because when I'm looking at code there's always different ways to do it, and I was just wondering how you're able to like get used to that in like a bigger company, and like how it would look like and how it would be. So yeah, I was just
That's a
wondering if you could tell me that.
Yeah, of course. That's a great question. I'm still struggling with it right now because there's so much to learn, so much like documentations you need to go through. Like the bigger the company you go, the bigger the documentation is going to be in terms of internal like tribal knowledge they might have about something they did, and this is the design patterns and design choices that they made. So um, this is a graph that I saw while I was doing the onboarding journey. It's like you would imagine Amazon, all these big tech companies, like a spaceship that's like really fancy, but then you go and it's a freaking pirate ship. And it's like there's a curve that you just go through, which is like you put your first CR in, and you're like, so there's a saying that software engineers don't really make a real impact on business value until 6 months in. I think this is a pretty conventional saying, which goes in to show you there's so much like downloading that you need to do to really understand the internal system for you to really generate business value. But then your question just comes down to like my question just comes down to I think it's like how fast can you make that journey so you can make an impact faster? Because that's what's going to make you stand out if you could join in, right? So the trick that I use is like my manager told me to get my CR in first weekend, and for I don't know if you guys relate, but like like, you can't really make a PR unless you know the internal system. And assuming most people take about 1 month, my manager's like, hey, do it in 1 week. You just have to then just put an insane amount of hours and effort into just like looking at other people's PRs, looking at what's there. So one thing I did was like trace the architecture diagram of whatever system you're using and really write down like the functions that each of them handle there. And like if you can make a visual map of how things work, that usually helps a lot in my case. Um, Two is ask a lot of questions, like really ask a lot of questions. You have an excuse, especially if you're a new joiner, that you can, you're you'll be generous. You'll be judged more generously if you can ask dumb questions then versus you asking dumb questions like 6 months in. Because they'll be asking like, why are you asking this question now? Like you're not a new joiner anymore. Like, you should have known this. Versus, oh, he's new. He can ask these questions. So whatever questions you have, write them down, ask. But also in the meantime, I'm telling you to do your own work so your questions aren't like, how do I do this? It should be, hey, I looked at this. This is what I think it is supposed to do. Is this how it works? Or is this why it doesn't work? Like you should be asking those kind of insightful questions. I think that'll also separate you from the pack. Sorry, Matt. Does that answer your question, Matthew? I feel like I kind of went a little tangent there,
No,
but
for sure, 100% does. I feel like I've been working with like people looking at code bases everywhere. I would just like thought, like larger companies like Amazon, it would look like, as you said, a spaceship. But now that I'm hearing like it's a pirate ship and everything, definitely something that I should look at to like study more about the code and ask a lot more questions. Because I feel like I thought I'm like, oh, it's all these flashy buttons that I don't know what to press. Like I have to study every single one, but it seems like it's somewhat like just an everyday type of code base that you could just look at it, try to understand, and ask how the system works and everything. So that
yeah,
definitely
like
answers my questions. Yeah.
yeah, no, well, try to break stuff. Like you'll be excused for breaking stuff as long as you don't break anything too significant. Like don't break anything in production, but like if you can break like your bootstrap or local setup, like that's fine. That's something you can recover from. You can just do a git reset hard and just go to the main line and just start over. Like try to break multiple stuff. Honestly, the fastest way for you to learn anything, any kind of system is just to actually put a code in, see what works, what doesn't work, like tweak a little things, like look at the arguments, see like if it works or not. Yeah, like what can you do? Like sometimes you have to touch the fire to know it's hot.
100%. Let's just hope that I know the difference between how to break the production code and the my local bootstrap code.
Ho- hopefully you'll know that you won't be in the production, like you won't be pushing anything into prod. Like that would be like yeah, that would be terrible. As long as you don't do that, I think you're okay. Most cases.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's pretty much all the questions I have for today.
Yeah, no problem, Matthew.
Awesome. So I'm gonna see if there's some other people who want to queue up questions for a call-in. And later on, I'm gonna read some of the questions there. But Kyle, you said a couple of things like to touch on. Um, when you said like putting up one CR right away, which for all intents and purposes, guys, is like PR. Putting it up a unit of work as fast as possible. There's something embedded in that too, right?
Right.
You have already communicated to your manager so early on who you are, what you want to do. You know what I mean? That you're not saying, "Hey, I'm the most awesome guy right now," but you're saying, "I'm ready to give everything I've got, and I would like you to help me to like know where I should be putting my eggs," right? Because that's exactly where the manager can help you. But if you don't do the communication, it's very hard for the manager, even if for himself or herself has an extremely high standard. They don't know that you have that high standard. And so
Right.
it's very hard for a manager to just blanket say, hey, push yourself to the Olympic level, right?
Right.
But if you communicated it already, it's so much easier for them to say, oh, okay, I met somebody with a like-minded, similar mindset, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to push you the way
Right.
I kind of push myself, right? So it already signals that you had good communication to begin with, because
Right.
people don't just blanket do that.
No.
They don't just expect productivity unless you already went there and said, I'm ready to give this everything I've got, right? So
Right.
I thought that was really cool. Um, and then
Like you
there's
gotta.
another one that you said.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I
Yeah.
think what Mike told me on too is like, guys, like if you're trying to impress someone, you gotta signal a positive trajectory. Like, and the first thing you could do at the very start is like set expectations for who you are and like what kind of person you are. And all you can do afterwards is just earn trust by delivering results.
You better walk the walk after you talk
Yeah,
the
like
talk, right?
if you talk the talk and if you, I think one thing you'll see is like if you're real, like for all intents and purposes of what real means, like people who are real will see people who just talk and don't deliver. It's easy to talk like, oh, I'm gonna do this, that. But it's not that often you see someone who actually walks after they talk.
Right.
So like separate yourself from the pack, guys. Like
Totally. And then there's another piece before we take the next call. When you said, that immunity blanket of make sure you ask a lot of questions, right? You can ask a lot of questions when you join early on, but a lot of times what people get worried about is they want to, deal with imposter syndrome right away, where
right,
they want to look smart right away early on. This just goes straight into growth mindset. If you know that you can grow, then you would want to use your immunity blanket to be maximally dumb and maximally learning,
yeah,
instead of using your immunity blanket by risking as little as possible, even though you have immunity, because you don't think you're going to grow. So you need to be kind of fixed, so to speak, at a high y intercept. If you're going to call it a graph, it's like, there's no run, right? There's no growth. There's no upward trajectory of me. And so I just need to be as high as possible now. Even if I don't know, I need to pretend to know. That's an incredibly fixed mindset, right?
it's all
When you're
downhill.
saying, hey, it's all downhill from there, right?
Yeah,
So,
you're gonna go downhill so
but as soon
fast.
as you have that growth mindset and you're like, no, I know I can get better. So why wouldn't I be the person to ask a lot of the questions, right? The other thing that I know you and I already agree on, that like it again, you take it for granted, so probably you don't even say, is there's a reciprocity to this. You're allowed to ask a lot of questions, especially if you're already overperforming in your CRs, right? Like you're a person that puts in so much unit of productivity. It's different when somebody's putting in a lot of productivity and asking a lot of questions. It immediately signals high caliber, highly curious, right? And that just correlates so well with somebody who's going to be a great senior,
Right.
like very quickly great senior. But as soon as you're the person who never puts in a single PR, CR for a long time, like that, right? But you're asking a lot of questions, and just for 6 months, you have no unit of productivity put in to the code base. That's that's not the same, even with the same kind of immunity blanket, right? So I
Right.
remember for you, the first week goes by, and you're happy. It's like, yeah, I got my first unit of productivity in, right? I feel like you take for granted how hard you work to make sure that you have productivity injected, and that reciprocity behind it, where it's like, hey, this guy's really trying hard to put some productivity into the company, and he has a lot of questions, and I'm more than happy to answer his questions, right?
I think you'll see senior engineers also ask dumb questions too, just for the sake of
Yeah,
asking dumb questions. I think something Mike encouraged in our team when I was with Mike is
yeah,
you should be asking all the dumb questions all the time. Like in the meantime, doing your work. It's just that good engineers won't look down on you for asking dumb questions. They'll rather encourage me. Like just yesterday, I was talking to my senior engineer, and he is like, "Do you know this?" And I knew it conceptually, kind of, but at that point, you should just say, "I don't," and he'll just be like, "Yeah,
yes,
that's a good answer." Like that's because I told him honestly, like I have a vague idea, but I'm not sure, and he'll just appreciate honesty. It's like that's something that I think you need to just um, convey as a junior engineer. If you don't know
right,
something, tell them you don't know right away rather than waiting a few weeks in to tell them you don't know because now you just wasted time and you're paying salary. So now you're just a
yeah.
dead loss. Like what have you done? Like now you just achieved nothing.
Yeah, and what are you gonna do if your manager or your senior says, "Do you know this?" and you don't know very well, and you say yes, and they say, "Oh, that's great because I don't know this very well. Anyways, I have a very sophisticated problem here, and
Right.
I can solve it up to A, B, C, but maybe you can help me with D, and you don't even know the A,
Right.
right?"
Yeah.
And then you're like, "Oh my goodness, this guy just brought like a super engineering mindset, and he knows the A, B, C, but because he doesn't know the D, he's saying he doesn't know it." And you don't know the half of A, and you said you know it.
Yeah.
And now we have a different standard that we have set, right? Like that is the walk part that is missing, right? So being
Yeah.
a thorough engineer who's capable of saying, and honestly, this goes to the manager. The manager should do a good job, right? If you do a good job, you would have an immunity blanket in at least your own team because that's the org that you have high influence over. Like you'd have at least immunity blanket in your own team, not just in the beginning, but they should be encouraging you to ask all the questions, right? One of the measures that I had when I was managing was amongst all the teams in the world, if we have learned the most in a year's worth of time compared to anyone else, asking the dumbest questions and never judging each other for it, even if it needs to be in like a private channel, I don't mind as long as we have learned the most, then I'm super happy, right? So
Right.
I think some of it has to be the manager's responsibility. But even if, like, again, even if the manager is not being a perfect manager, it's on you to make sure you learn, right?
Yeah. Because like
Right.
you'll quickly realize like it's a team effort, but also an individual effort. Like your career is up to you. Like run
Yeah,
with
for
it.
sure. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. All right, let's let in Edward.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
I
Edward.
can hear you.
Oh, perfect. All right. Yeah, I just had a couple questions. Uh, s- I know you're working at Amazon right now, and I'm wondering if you can speak for other big tech companies as well. And this is also for you, Mike, as well. We all know about the current macroeconomic climate in big tech. I was just wondering, you know, has the standard of performance increased as a baseline because of it? Because we are forced to take better engineers, right? So has that translated already into like a higher standard of performance at the minimum level?
I'll go first. I can't speak for other big tech because I've only been in Amazon, but I've heard rumors of them also adopting like the Amazonian approach of like your um, they call it URA, which is unregretted attrition. So like people leaving because they're low performance. There's also PIP, which is a personal improvement plan. So like they'll put you on PIP, and I think every 6% of Amazon gets fired every year if you're a low performer. So that bar was already there. They might increase it to 12. I think that's something that I've also heard. So like in terms of that aspect, yes, the standard of bar, like the low bar for like what a good performance could mean is slowly rising up. Also, it's like you'll see that there's a velocity chart they'll track you by. It's not everything, but the number of CRs and the points that you're able to carry during a sprint, let's just say 2 weeks, it's going to be measured up against others. So that bar is, as you know, it's like because this low bar is rising, your speed and your effectiveness is going to matter more and more. So like in terms of Amazon, I've seen that. I think at Clearco right before I left, like Mike was also telling us this was being implemented at the company as well. There was like a velocity chart that they're going to measure how you perform. And I heard Google and Microsoft, I think Facebook was also adopting it. So yeah, not that points are
Cool. Yeah.
everything, but yeah,
Yeah. Points are not everything. But for some people, it is everything, I
right.
suppose. Um, Quantitative problems. Okay, so you measure one quantitative thing, and you very quickly can game it. So then you have to find a counterbalancing quantitative thing. And if you actually have the most complex quantitative measurement, you will have done so many measurements that it just ends up equaling human intuition anyways. The problem is that relying on human intuition is not very scalable. That fails very quickly, right? It also introduces a lot of politics and stuff like that. So I think there's a time and a place and a degree of how much you should rely on quantitative metrics. I think there's also a qualitative metric as well. But to answer your question, um, is like the lower bar, I think what you're asking, Edward, is the lower bar threshold of being an engineer moving up? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, that's in essence what I'm asking. Yeah.
Yeah, um, I think the lower bar of what the engineer should be has always been the same. I think some companies have lowered it. I think many companies have not. Google, for example, I don't believe they lowered it, right? So it's like if they can get more people, great. But if they can't, they're not just going to hire bad people to see if they accidentally get lucky. So if you were actually playing the game not of being hired, but excelling in your organization after you're hired, which is what we're always focusing on Launch Up, right? It's like, how can you be an amazing engineer? Period. It is so far above the theoretical, what is the minimum bar for you to be an actual good engineer in a fairly respectable company or sizable company or whatever. Yeah, I don't think that has moved. And I don't think the goal has changed for students as well. For me, the goal will never be if you can get in, right? Like if that was the goal, then I would have made the model of pay me as much money as possible, and then let's see if you can get in, right? The model is let's see how much you can grow, and let's make sure we make money as you grow. So I don't think you'd have to worry. I honestly think it's genuinely hard, right? Like when I get into a sales call, I'm doing an anti-sale all the time, right? It's like trying to convince people how hard it is. And the reason why is it is so hard that if you crack it, I don't think many people cracked it. In the big tech companies might be laying off folks, especially because they grew a lot from growth, from projected growth being wrong. But the truth is, if you ask anyone that is a high level executive, they're still dying to find the top 20% talent. The top 20% talent is a scarcity problem that the world will not easily solve. Um, honestly, to solve that problem, you need previous systems like funnels of education actually helping, probably from grade 7 onward, to reshape how you are, reshape how college and university is, to actually produce on average better engineers so that they actually have the wealth of high caliber engineers that are needed, in an organization. And I think like you should always aim to be there. You can think of it kind of like, can I be part of the Olympic team in my country? Right? If you have the goal as that, then well, it's very hard, right? And getting a job is the easy part, but learning there, networking there, moving up, doing important things there, impactful things there. If you set that as the goal, then the threshold will. I don't think it'll ever really affect students. I think it does affect you in the short run, though, right? Because in the short run, if you constrict kind of like the number of jobs in the next, like let's say, year or so, it might be a little bit harder. Maybe you barely not get into the company you wanted to get into, but you wait even just a year or two, and very quickly, everything has changed. So yeah, I can see it being a problem in the short run, but you took upon your career over the long run, and so did everyone else. So I think it's totally fine over the long run. The problem is that people they let the short run issue get to their long run decision making, right? That would be the problem usually. But yeah, I think you're good. You're safe, and your curiosity is actually going to, you, as I know you, Edward, your curiosity is going to, you're going to be far beyond that. Yeah.
Hopefully, but thank you so much for those answers. That was really enlightening. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so let's see. We've got some questions in the chat.
Right.
So I'm just gonna read out Nelly's question here. What differences do you see between junior devs and more experienced devs, whether it's soft skill, hard skill, or anything else that you've seen at work and has stood out to you?
So a good senior engineer, I think Mike went over this answer too, and my answer is going to be pretty similar. It's like your ability to deal with more ambiguous subjects as they come. A good senior engineer will just not just be as productive, but you're also mentoring the junior engineers too. So that's part of their job description, is to like answer a lot of dumb questions from junior engineers and being able to guide them. I think that's one thing that they measure you by. So you should be able to leave a meaningful code review. Like when you comment on someone's like PR, like you should be pointing out what the weakness is. But also a good one will stand out by not just being like, hey, this is wrong, do it again. It'll be more of, hey, why did you make this decision? Like, have you considered this? Then they would just like kind of teach them along the way of what could be done better, rather than just pointing out this is wrong, do it again. That's a short way to put it. I think soft skill wise, I think that's a soft skill is just like the delivery matters. Because as you go up, ICs are pretty individualistic, but you also have a junior that's going to be working for you. Because your job is to break the ambiguity down into smaller problems that like has a hard scope. So now your job is, one hard skill is just being able to deal with ambiguity and break it down into something that's very clear for smaller people, but also just to guide them along these scope so they can do their job better. I think that's a good senior. Junior devs are just being able to deal with the scope really well at a certain pace, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a level of ownership and trust that is different from a senior. That you're getting just closer to the actual business objective, right? Hey, let's achieve this. That's more vague. That's beyond senior actually, but you know, it's closer to as vague as like let's achieve this, and expecting people to help out. I also think a good senior has a lot of leadership in them. So a lot of people
Yeah.
are thinking, oh, individual contributors are not a leadership path. It's like, no, it's not a management path. But if you look at all people who do well, again, staff engineer, engineering manager, director, everybody needs to propose to work together to achieve a big important thing. Anything easy that we can do today is probably not important. So to rally people together is a task that requires so much leadership, even on the side. So I would expect senior engineers that are good to always have more leadership. You talked about PRs. It's like there's a level of approving the PR randomly. There's a level of, you know, finding and catching the issues. But then there's a level of catching the issues and proposing things that you could be doing with a link to what you could try reading. You know, like going the extra mile to make sure that this PR does go through, that our team's unit of productivity goes through. That's an amazing amount of leadership that some people have cracked. And when I see that, I think to myself, this person is not just measuring their own, you know, throughput. They're not just measuring their own cycle time. They are measuring the team's throughput, the team cycle time. That's more vague. That's a wider scope. And as soon as somebody starts behaving more towards that, you know, like that's just not a junior, right? It's more senior
Right.
than junior. So I think taking on larger objective, the team, carry the team, put the team on your back, right? Don't just say this could be done in another way. Tell me which are the other ways. Put some skin in the game, right?
Yeah.
And what's beautiful about actually suggesting something? When you suggest it, you could be wrong.
Yeah.
Isn't that beautiful, right? Like there's a lot of people who will write PR comments without being able to be wrong. So it's not good enough to cast doubt. if you want to do a really good PR review, you should cast doubt and you should progress that PR forward. Make it
Honestly,
better.
Mike, there's nothing more that I think that's really important as a junior is to. Mike showed me this when he showed me his PR that I think was really well written. Is invite people to your weakest part of your code.
Yes.
Think about the part that you think that's you had second thoughts about, and just comment here like, "Hey, this is what I thought would work, but I'd love your suggestions on how this could be done better." Like in my case, it was like recently I was writing a SQL query on something that I could be joining, but in Amazon's case, like the system that I'm handling right now handles about 1 million queries a day in terms of responses. So doing a join here could be a really expensive operation in terms of the time spent on the process, because this could be a bottleneck somewhere else. So you should be asking people is like, can we do a join a different way where we don't need to do a join because it's a more expensive operation than let's just say where clause, which is just going to filter our results out way earlier than a join would. Like invite them. Like this is a conversation. This is a learning opportunity for you to ask about like, hey, like, fuck, I don't know anything. Help me. Like, but
Yeah.
in a more generous manner. Like, I think I could be doing better here. Like, because and just signaling to them that you know this is something that could be improved, I think is important as a junior. 'Cause it'll show.
100%. Like think like an engineer. Like we're building a bridge and you're the junior person and you know deep down inside that you feel weakest in this part of the bridge. If that bridge collapses and you never pointed to that weak part of the bridge, you will not feel like an elite engineer.
No.
But instead, imagine the trust that you can develop when you put up a beautiful PR because you worked really hard at it, and then you're pointing to the problems, right?
Like,
And
yeah, I
you're
put a
saying,
CR up.
I think this, I
Yeah,
think it
like
could be good, but what about this, right?
like I put a CR up and I leave comments everywhere in my own code. Like, hey, this is how I did it. This
Yeah,
is why I did it. But I'd love to know if you have anything better that could be done.
yeah,
Leave comments. Like, it should like I think that's also setting the tone for what kind of a company. Like, you could set the tone for like what kind of environment that you're setting up for your team. Like,
right.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's really
So
important.
I see like two more written questions, so I'll just read those out, and then I think we'll call it a wrap.
Yep, sounds
I
good.
got a question here from Josh, and Josh says, "What are ways a junior can increase their velocity and finish more work quickly?"
Josh, sorry, there's no better answer. Just put more time in. There's nothing that beats time.
I love it.
Like, if you're really smart, sure, like might have a different way. But since I'm not, like, I just work insane hours. Not insane, I just work more hours. Yeah, like
Yeah,
I wake up at
and
5 and I
you get
usually
quicker.
yeah, like it just comes with experience and time. I wake up at 5 and I finish work at 2. It's not because like or like I sleep earlier these days, so I can have a better morning. But it's like I don't want to work longer. It's just I just suck. I think I suck, so I just work longer. You know
The
what am I gonna?
desire to
Yeah,
get better is so
like I
high.
want to close that gap as fast as I can. So like I'm just gonna have to put in more hours. Like there's no other way around it. Like I wish there was a better answer for you, Josh. But like a junior that increases their velocity is the one that spends more time. Like you can
Yeah,
tell the quality questions that people ask are different if you spend more time thinking about how you can ask it and the work you put in.
that's another thing that can help you to become a senior is to spend the time to actually solve things so well by yourself
Yeah,
that at the end, when you have questions, they're so hard that even the senior helping is like, yeah, I could see how hard this one is. And
yeah,
I appreciate the drive that you have, right? So I also think that it's not a duality for life, right? Like maybe you want to become proficient so that you can contribute, you know? Like maybe you want to do that, but at some point you calm down a bit, right? But that doesn't mean that somebody wants to stay in the beginner stage for like in a very comfortable speed, right? Maybe you want to race and then start jogging after, right?
like
So
okay, you can't like senior engineers are the type of people who already ran a marathon and they're walking now. Like you can't
yeah,
compare yourself to the same bar and be like they're walking, so I can walk as
I'm
well.
walking with you.
You're
It's like,
like
but I didn't run the marathon.
yeah, like no amount of like prolonged running is gonna equate to prolonged like no amount of prolonged walking is gonna equate to prolonged running. Like they already ran, like, and
Yeah,
you should be sprinting, like
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. That's a great analogy. Like somebody who did a sprint and then a marathon and is dead and is like crawling basically. And I
yeah,
just join up at the end and I just say, Hey, well, like
you
I'm
see
walking
it,
faster than you though.
yeah, like yeah, like you can't be like, oh, so that's the pace I need to put myself at to get workout. Like, sorry,
Yeah.
man, no,
Yeah,
like
give them a benefit of the doubt, so to speak, right? And I
yeah,
feel like that's what um one of the reasons why Josh asked the question is because Josh is one of the guys that are actually working around the clock, right? Like he's like, okay, I'm working around the clock. How can I be faster? And embedded in the answer of Kyle, Josh, is continue. You'll get faster. That's actually the
yeah.
best way is you spend
Honestly,
more time with
yeah,
code, right? You'll get
yeah.
faster.
It just comes with time. Like, just like picking up a new language comes easier after you see a different stuff. Like, if you knew
For sure.
French, you'll probably speak Spanish faster. Like, stuff like that. If you've seen a big
Yeah.
system before, the next time you see a big system, it'll be faster. But that
Right.
doesn't take away from the fact that you need to spend a lot of time learning the first one really well for you to get faster the
Yeah.
next time. Yeah.
Yeah. Looks like we got a last question here from Sung. What are ways to avoid burnout in a foreign setting and keeping motivation high? P.S. Thank you for sharing your journey with us.
Uh, Burnouts. Yeah. I don't know. Find an outlet. I am also worried as well, but burnout. So I guess like this is like the first I'll just address the burnout part in the earlier cycle is to manage your expectations. Like I think the one of the biggest reasons I see people burning out is like they have an extremely high goal for themselves, and that's pretty far-fetched from reality. So it becomes like a pretty downward spiral, vicious cycle if you see yourself just falling short because your goals were extremely high at the first place. So that just comes at the cost of managing your expectations. Lay out a roadmap that's realistic for you. Don't say your first job out is going to be Amazon or Fang, because realistically, that won't be the case for most people. So reverse engineer where you want to be, but break the spell steps down to something that's just a biteable chunk that you think
Yeah.
is outside the bound, but just enough that you really push yourself. In a foreign setting and keeping your motivation high, um, there's a quote that I really like. I forgot the name. I think it's called Stockdale's paradox, which is like you cannot lose hope of the ultimate goal you want to achieve, but at the same time, like don't confuse that faith of hope with the amount of hard work that it's going to take. And I think people often confuse the two. It's like because my hopes and my dreams are really high, I'll be able to get there, but then just ignore the hard work that needs to be put in beforehand. So like manage your expectations, but don't lose hope. But at the same time, work hard. Work hard's given. Like you can't get to anywhere you want without working hard. In a foreign setting and in keeping motivation high, foreign setting is just tough. Like if you're an immigrant, like just getting used to acclimated to a different environment is always tough. Like I would say there's things I can help you with, but things I can't. It's like stuff like finding friends I can't help you with. Like you got to just find yourself in a group of people that will like root for you. Like Mike rooted for me, or like a community to vent to. I think would be pretty helpful. Like don't go to blind guys. It's very toxic. Like stuff for like Reddit, like Reddit, where people are actually like trying to get stuff done, or like even in your own community right now at Lunch Up, like find a supportive community. Like that really makes a big difference in terms of like, because some people will look down on your goals and be like, you can't get there, like you can't do it. But like that will help. Motivation high is just if your motivation's not high and you don't work it, like you don't work towards it, I don't know what to tell you. Like I feel like is that really your goal then? Like if your motivation wanes and you stop, like real consistency is I feel like when your motivation's low and you still do it anyways. Yeah,
I love it. I love
like
it. No, that's exactly what we stand for here. So I absolutely love it.
like
Let's go back to your running analogy, right? It's like
yeah.
nobody can just run 2 hours right off the bat if they haven't been exercising. But I think there's an element of what if I just regularly exercise and I promise that I'll take my cardio to its limit every time. Like I'll push it. Naturally, you imagine this person will get better. Right now, like you said, maybe I have to adjust my expectation. Maybe it takes me a long time to be a guy who can run for 2 hours, right? But it would require me to be regular about it and for me to push it. If I'm regularly walking 2 blocks, I'm never going to end up as the 2 hour runner. And so I need to be pushing it. I need to be regular. And then from there, it'd be a dosage of humility that tells you this might be tough, but I'm willing to go the distance, right? I think that you find yourself a different person over time.
Yeah, so I mean, just the last thing that I wanted to give you is just don't look for motivation for you as a reason for you to do stuff. Like just sit down and start. And I think the motivation usually comes from you actually doing the action than you actually having the motivation to do it beforehand. Similar to how most people
Yeah.
feel better at the gym rather than the act of actually going to the gym, I think is the toughest part for most people. Like sit down, open your laptop, like start coding something really simple and size up.
Yeah. Great. There's an entire book on it. I believe the title is Motivation Myth, where everybody wants to believe that because I have motivation, I will then do work. But it's actually the other way
Yeah.
around. Motivation is not the cause. Motivation is the effect.
Yeah.
It's like when I do work, I start to feel motivated, right? So if you think about it like that, and the entire book is on that. So what you just said is the thesis of the book right there, Kyle. It's
Yeah.
like, go do some work and you'll feel more motivated. And if you don't yet, go do some more work until you get a unit of productivity. It's the win. It's the feedback loop you need, right?
Yeah, I don't want to sidetrack the conversation too much, but also stay away from things that give you like an instant dopamine satisfaction, gratifications, like
Yeah.
games or stuff. Like they might give you a short-term satisfaction, but that kind of ruins your reward system in terms of what actually hard work and reward feels like when you achieve it. Like,
Yeah. Delay your gratification, just like
yeah,
your career is. Yeah. Great.
hope,
Awesome. Yeah. I feel like there's a comment that Roxy, it's not a question, but I'll read it anyway. Hi, Kyle. I don't have specific questions, just want to share that I resonate a lot with your stories. I also studied business and interned at a management consulting company. Then I realized that I couldn't imagine myself doing that for 10, 20 years. Then I worked as a product manager for 1 year, of which I came to realize I can't be successful as I have no tech background. But, now I ended up in University of Toronto doing my second Bachelor of Computer Science. There's some similarities here, Eka.
yeah.
I appreciate your honesty in confessing all the hard work and struggles. Thanks for sharing and have learned a lot.
Oh, great. It's nice. I hope it helped.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, well, um, I think on behalf of all the folks in the audience member seats and Launch Up overall and everyone else who's gonna watch this, want to say super, super duper thank you.
Uh-huh.
Your Saturday after, working so hard, I was hoping that you could have a moment of break. But of course, I snagged you away for this one and you shared with us some amazing things. I honestly think that we only glossed over 20%. And we should probably do it again, maybe a month later or something like that. Dig in a little bit more into specific stories and whatnot.